During the first week of my retirement, my son said to me, "We don't need another mouth to feed in this house," and found me a job as a cleaner. I smiled and agreed, hiding my cold anger behind a mask of resignation. But when I didn't show up for work, he realized something, namely that he had underestimated me, and now his life would never be the same again. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I have wonderful news. Today was my last day at work, finally retired. The fork slipped from Christopher's hand, clattering against his plate. Lily's eyes widened, her mouth forming a perfect circle of shock. I beamed at them both, expecting congratulations, maybe even a toast with the cheap wine we kept for special occasions. Instead, silence stretched across our small kitchen table like a chasm. Christopher recovered first, his face flushing red. "What?" "Dad, you can't just quit your job like that. Did you even think about what this means?" "Of course I did," I said, my smile wavering. 40 years of service, son. I've earned this. I thought we could celebrate." "Celebrate?" Lily's voice cut through the air sharp as a blade. She set down her water glass with deliberate force. "Chris, your father thinks we're going to feed him for free?" The warmth in my chest began to freeze. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment during my drive home. I'd pictured smiles, maybe Christopher clapping me on the back, telling me how proud he was of his old man. Instead, my son's face contorted with something I'd never seen directed at me before. Pure annoyance. "Listen, Dad." Christopher leaned forward, his manager voice replacing any trace of filial affection. "I'm not keeping an extra mouth to feed. You need a job. Tomorrow. I don't care if it's flipping burgers or stocking shelves, but you're not sitting around here living off my paycheck." Each word hit me like a physical blow. I stared at this man I'd raised, whose college education I'd funded, whose wedding I'd helped pay for. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across his features, making him look like a stranger. Lily nodded approvingly. "Douglas, you're 65, not 90. Plenty of people your age work. My neighbor's father bags groceries until he's 73. "But I thought," I began. "You thought wrong," Christopher interrupted. "You think money grows on trees? Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain this house? To keep you fed and clothed? I work 50 hours a week at Whitmore Industries just to keep us afloat." The irony wasn't lost on me, though neither of them would understand it. Not yet. My untouched dinner grew cold as I absorbed their words. The meatloaf Lily had made, my favorite, now looked unappetizing under the fluorescent light. Everything about this moment felt wrong, distorted, like viewing my life through a funhouse mirror. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I should have discussed it with you first." Christopher's expression softened slightly, perhaps hearing defeat in my tone. "Look, Dad, I'm not trying to be cruel, but reality is reality. We can't afford a freeloader." Dependent. That word buzzed in my head as I nodded, playing the role of the punished father. I said I would think about their words. Good. Lily gathered the plates with brisk efficiency. The sooner the better. They disappeared into the living room, leaving me alone at the kitchen table. I could hear the television spring to life, their voices returning to normal conversational tones, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just shattered 40 years of dreams in 10 minutes. I remained seated, staring at the empty chairs where my family had been moments before. The house settled around me with creaks and sighs, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds of a normal evening that felt anything but normal. Slowly, I stood and began clearing the remaining dishes, my hands moving automatically while my mind processed what had just occurred. They saw me as a burden. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, they viewed their father as nothing more than an unwanted expense. I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward my small bedroom at the back of the house, leaving Christopher and Lily to their evening entertainment. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, but tonight I needed to think. I lay fully clothed on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows from passing cars painted moving patterns. The house had settled into evening quiet, but my mind churned with the dinner conversation. 40 years of faithful service, and this was my reward, being called a freeloader by my own son. The bedroom was small, furnished with just the basics, A single bed, one nightstand, and a dresser that had seen better decades. Family photos lined the dresser top. Christopher's graduation, his wedding, holidays where we all looked happy. Had that been an illusion? Voices drifted through the thin wall separating my room from the master bedroom. At first, just murmurs, but gradually growing louder as Christopher and Lily settled into their nightly routine. "Can't believe he just announced it like that," Christopher was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the drywall. I turned toward the wall, suddenly alert. They were talking about me. He thinks he can just sit at home on my dime. Christopher's voice rose, apparently not concerned about being overheard. 40 years of work. So what? That doesn't entitle him to retirement on my salary. Lily's response came through muffled but distinct. What if he refuses to work? What if he just sits around watching television all day? Then we'll take his pension and put him in a nursing home. Enough already. I'm tired of supporting dead weight. The words hit me like ice water. Nursing home. Dead weight. I gripped the bedsheet, my knuckles white in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "He's been mooching off us for 2 years since Mom died," Lily continued. "Free meals, and now he doesn't even want to work? He's got nerves of steel." Poverty. I closed my eyes, remembering the checks I had written. $23,000 for Christopher's college education. $8,000 for his wedding. They didn't even mention that they were living in my house. "The old man doesn't realize how expensive everything is now," Christopher said. "Utilities, groceries, insurance. He thinks it's still 1995. "Maybe we should give him a deadline," Lily suggested. 1 week to find work, or he's out." "Perfect. And if he complains, we'll remind him that beggars can't be choosers." Their laughter drifted through the wall, casual and cruel. I lay there absorbing every word, every dismissive chuckle, every casual reference to my uselessness. These were the people I'd sacrificed for, the family I'd loved unconditionally. The house grew quiet again as they prepared for sleep. I remained motionless, processing this new reality. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose fears I'd soothed, viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient expense. A nursing home, the phrase repeated in my mind like a drumbeat. They'd already planned my exile, already decided my fate. Take my pension, the modest monthly check that represented 4 decades of labor, and warehouse me with other discarded parents. I thought about my colleagues who'd received gold watches and retirement parties. Jim Morrison got a fishing boat from his kids. Helen family threw her a surprise celebration at the country club. I got threats and ultimatums over meatloaf. But as I lay there in the darkness, something else began to stir beneath the hurt and shock, a cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. They wanted to play games with their father's future. They wanted to treat Douglas Cook like some helpless old fool. Perhaps it was time they learned exactly who Douglas Cook really was. I closed my eyes and began to plan. Sleep did not come. I lay motionless in the darkness, listening to the house quieting down around me, while all the sacrifices replayed in my head. The silence now seemed different, not peaceful, but heavy with unspoken truth. 40 years I worked hard, saving every penny I could spare for Christopher's future. Double shifts at the factory when he needed books for school. Weekend jobs when his college bills arrived. All those years of eating canned soup while my paycheck went toward his education at Oregon State University. I remembered the night he called home, panicked about tuition increases. "Don't worry, son," I told him, already calculating how many extra hours I'd need to work. "Your old man will figure it out." And I did, trading sleep for his dreams, my comfort for his opportunities. His wedding day flashed through my memory, Lily in her white dress, Christopher beaming in his rented tuxedo, both of them blissfully unaware that their budget wedding had quietly doubled in cost. I'd covered the difference without a word, watching them dance to music I'd paid for, eating cake I'd financed, celebrating love I'd made possible. Throughout it all, I'd lived modestly, not from poverty, but from choice. Let them think I struggled paycheck to paycheck, while my real investments grew quietly in accounts they never knew existed. Better to be seen as generous than wealthy, or so I'd believed. My fingers traced the worn bedsheet, and I thought about Leonard Whitmore. 25 years ago, when his small manufacturing company was just a startup dream, I'd believed in his vision. $500,000 of investment capital, disguised as a loan to avoid complications. We'd shaken hands in his garage, two men betting on the future. Whitmore Industries now employed 3,000 people across Oregon and Washington. Christopher worked for a company his father had helped build, never knowing his paychecks were partially funded by the man he now called dead weight. All right, Christopher, this game can be played by two sides. The photo on my nightstand caught a sliver of streetlight. Christopher at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding the baseball glove I'd saved 2 months to buy. That boy had grown into a man who would steal his father's pension and abandon him to strangers. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He saw weakness where there was only kindness, mistook generosity for desperation, assumed his father's modest lifestyle meant his father was powerless. Tomorrow, I would surprise them all by agreeing to work. Let them think they'd won. Let them feel superior, while I positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes the best revenge required patience, and I'd spent 65 years learning how to wait for the right moment. The clock now read 1:23 a.m. In 6 hours, I would begin teaching my son the difference between charity and vulnerability. He wanted to see his father humbled. He'd get his wish. Right up until the moment he realized who was really holding the cards, I pulled the blanket up to my chin and finally allowed myself to sleep. Morning would bring new possibilities, and I intended to be well rested for what came next. Morning coffee was already brewing when I entered the kitchen. Christopher stood by the counter in his weekend clothes, while Lily buttered toast at the table. Both looked up as I appeared, their expressions mixing curiosity with residual hostility from last night's conversation. "Christopher, I've been thinking about your words," I said, settling into my usual chair. "You're right." The coffee mug froze halfway to Christopher's lips. Lily's knife stopped mid-spread, leaving a glob of butter suspended over her toast. They'd clearly expected another argument, more pleading about my retirement dreams. "Seriously?" Christopher set down his mug with obvious suspicion. "You're not going to fight us on this." "What would be the point?" I kept my voice steady, reasonable. A man my age should contribute to the household. I see that now. Lily exchanged glances with her husband, probably wondering if this was some kind of trick. They'd prepared for battle and found surrender instead. Christopher leaned against the counter, his manager persona emerging. "Well, since you're being practical about this, I might have a solution. There's a janitor position open at my company." Whitmore Industries. I felt a small smile threaten the corners of my mouth and quickly suppressed it. "That sounds perfect. I accept." "Just like that?" Lily's voice carried notes of disbelief and satisfaction. "You're willing to clean offices." "Honest work is honest work," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "When would I start?" Christopher's chest puffed slightly with newfound authority. "Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. You'd be ideal for the position. No complaints, follows orders, grateful for the opportunity." He paused, savoring his next words. "The pay is minimum wage, of course. But beggars can't be choosers, right?" There it was again, that phrase they'd laughed about through the thin walls. I nodded seriously, as if accepting both the job and the insult with equal grace. "I'll need to speak with my boss Leonard about approving the hire," Christopher continued, "but I'm sure he'll understand the family situation. Probably feels sorry for you, actually." Leonard. My oldest friend, my business partner, the man whose garage I'd sat in 25 years ago discussing dreams and investments. "That's very kind of you to help arrange this," I said, letting just enough gratitude creep into my voice to make them feel magnanimous. Lily reached across the table and patted my hand condescendingly. "See? This wasn't so difficult. You just needed to face reality about your situation." My situation. If only she knew. "I appreciate you both helping me understand," I said. "It'll be good to have purpose again, to contribute something meaningful to the family income." Christopher nodded approvingly. Exactly the attitude we wanted to see. Maybe this will work out, after all. He pulled out his phone, presumably to contact Leonard about the janitor position. I watched him dial, imagining Leonard's reaction when he received this particular request. "I'll make the call this afternoon," Christopher said, Get everything set up for Monday. Perfect, I replied, already picturing my first day back at Whitmore Industries. It would indeed be a homecoming, just not the kind Christopher anticipated. The conversation moved on to weekend plans and grocery lists, but I barely listened. My mind was already planning Monday morning, calculating exactly how long it would take for the truth to emerge. Very soon, they'd learn that underestimating Douglas Cook was the costliest mistake they'd ever made. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. The week between my agreement and today had passed in a blur of Christopher's smug preparations. He'd proudly informed Leonard about solving his father problem, purchased cleaning supplies for me, and outlined my duties with barely concealed satisfaction. I'd played along perfectly, nodding appreciatively while internally counting down to this moment. At 7:30 a.m., I sat in my kitchen sipping coffee and reading the morning paper. Through the window, I could see neighbors heading to work, their routines unchanged by the small revolution brewing in my house. The cleaning supplies Christopher had bought remained untouched, in their bag, by the door, a prop in the theater of his expectations. My phone remained silent until 8:15. Then it erupted. "Dad, where are you?" Christopher's voice crackled with fury and panic. My boss just tore me apart. Leonard was waiting for the new janitor, and nobody showed up. "Oh my," I said, affecting just the right tone of confused concern. What time was I supposed to be there? 8 o'clock. We discussed this every day this week. How could you forget? I paused, letting his agitation build before responding with carefully measured bewilderment. "I'm so sorry, Christopher. Age, sometimes things just slip away from me. These old brains aren't what they used to be." "This isn't about your brain." His voice rose another octave. "I vouched for you. I told Leonard you'd be reliable. That hiring family was a smart move. Now I look like a complete fool." Perfect. I imagined Leonard's confusion, probably wondering why Christopher was so invested in hiring an elderly janitor. My old friend was nothing if not polite, but he'd certainly noticed the irregularity. "I feel terrible about this misunderstanding," I continued, maintaining my performance of elderly confusion. "What did Mr. Whitmore say?" "He asked why I was so personally involved in the hiring process. I had to explain you were my father, living at home, needed the work." Christopher's voice carried the bitter taste of professional embarrassment. The whole conversation was humiliating. Interesting. Leonard hadn't revealed our connection, maintaining his discretion, even when presented with this strange situation. He was probably trying to puzzle out why Douglas Cook's son was offering Douglas Cook a menial job at Douglas Cook's own company. "Perhaps I could come in this afternoon," I suggested helpfully, "make up for lost time." "No, tomorrow you will be at work at 7:45 a.m. sharp, or else—" He trailed off, probably remembering he was speaking to his supposedly forgetful father. "Just don't let this happen again, Dad. My reputation is on the line." "Of course, son. I understand completely." After he hung up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of deep satisfaction. Phase 1 had worked perfectly. Christopher was rattled, embarrassed before his boss, questioning his father's reliability. The careful authority he'd built around this arrangement was already cracking. Tomorrow would bring Phase 2, and I had several hours to prepare the next surprise. But for now, I'd accomplished exactly what I'd intended. I'd reminded Christopher that even when he thought he held all the cards, his father could still find ways to disrupt the game. I folded the newspaper and headed toward my computer. Phase 3 would require more preparation, but the foundation was already laid. With Christopher's angry phone call still echoing in my mind, I moved to the small desk in my bedroom, where 2 manila folders waited. I'd been preparing this particular surprise for 2 months, ever since the evening I'd discovered Lily's secret. It had been a January afternoon when I'd noticed Henderson and Associates, letterheads scattered across the kitchen counter. Lily had been careless, leaving work documents beside her coffee cup while she answered a phone call. My trained eye, 40 years of reviewing financial statements, immediately caught the irregularities in the expense reports. Office supplies, $847.50 as equipment maintenance, 1,234, 75. The numbers seemed inflated for a small accounting firm. I'd managed budgets for decades. These figures raised immediate red flags. "Interesting," I'd murmured to myself that day, carefully photographing the documents with my phone while Lily chatted in the next room. Why does Lily have work documents at home? And why do these numbers look so odd? That evening, I'd called my old acquaintance Michael Richardson, a forensic accountant who owed me several favors from our professional days. Michael, could you check something for me at Henderson and Associates? I'd asked casually. Completely confidential, of course. I'm curious about their actual office supply expenses over the past 6 months. 3 days later, Michael had discreetly provided me with the real expense reports. The comparison was damning. Lily had been systematically inflating costs and pocketing the difference. Office supplies that cost $347 became $847 on her reports. A $534 maintenance bill became $1,334.75 months of careful theft, hidden behind falsified receipts and altered invoices. Now, sitting at my computer, I opened both folders side by side. The evidence was irrefutable. Lily's falsified documents photographed from our kitchen table, alongside the authentic records Michael had obtained. The pattern was clear, systematic, and entirely criminal. I began typing the anonymous email. Dear Mr. Henderson, I am writing to inform you of serious financial irregularities in your company's expense reporting. Your employee, Lily Cook, has been systematically embezzling funds through falsified office supply and maintenance expenses. Please find attached documented evidence comparing reported expenses with actual vendor receipts. The pattern spans several months and represents substantial theft from your company. I recommend immediate investigation and audit of all expense reports submitted by Mrs. Cook. A concerned party. I attached the scanned evidence files, double-checked the anonymous email account I'd created specifically for this purpose, and hovered my finger over the send button. For a moment, I considered the consequences. Lily would likely be fired, possibly prosecuted. Christopher would face the stress of an unemployed wife under criminal investigation. Their financial stability would crumble. Then I remembered their laughter through the thin walls, their casual planning of my exile to a nursing home, their complete dismissal of the man who'd funded their entire comfortable existence. I clicked send. The email disappeared into cyberspace, carrying with it the destruction of Lily's career and Christopher's peace of mind. Within hours, possibly by this afternoon, their world would begin unraveling from a direction they'd never anticipated. I closed the laptop and gathered the physical documents, feeding them into my small paper shredder. The evidence had served its purpose. Now it needed to disappear completely. Outside, spring afternoon sunshine painted the kitchen in golden light. I made myself a sandwich and sat down to wait. Soon enough, the consequences would unfold. Christopher had wanted to play games with his father's future. Now he'd discover that his father had been collecting insurance policies all along. The afternoon stretched ahead of me like a blank canvas, waiting for careful brushstrokes. Christopher's morning humiliation had been satisfying, but it was merely the opening gambit. Now came the methodical work that would truly demonstrate the difference between a helpless old man and a strategist with 40 years of business experience. In my small study, afternoon sunlight illuminated 2 neat stacks of documents on my desk. The left pile contained photocopies of Henderson and Associates expense reports I'd captured with my phone camera 2 months ago. The right stack held the authentic records Michael Richardson had discreetly obtained through his professional network. The comparison told a story of systematic theft spanning 8 months. Lily had been clever, I'd give her that. Rather than stealing large amounts at once, she'd inflated legitimate expenses by precise percentages. A genuine $347 office supply order became $847 on her reports, exactly $500 more. Computer equipment costing $1,234 appeared as $1,740 in company records. She'd even created fictional vendor relationships, submitting invoices for services never rendered. My calculator showed approximately $18,000 diverted into her personal accounts. Not enough to trigger automatic audits, but substantial enough to fund her designer handbags and weekend shopping trips that always puzzled me, given her modest salary. I opened my laptop and accessed the anonymous email account I'd established weeks ago. The message needed to sound concerned but professional, with enough specific detail to trigger immediate investigation. "Dear Mr. Henderson," I typed, "I'm writing to alert you to serious financial discrepancies in your accounting department. Your employee Lily Cook has been systematically embezzling company funds through falsified expense reporting. The attached evidence shows documented proof of inflated invoices, fictional vendor payments, and personal purchases disguised as business expenses. The pattern spans January through August 2025, representing approximately $18,000 in theft. I recommend immediate internal audit of all expense reports submitted by Mrs. Cook, with particular attention to office supplies, equipment maintenance, and consulting fees. A concerned observer." Methodically, I attached scanned copies of the most damning evidence, side-by-side comparisons of Lily's reports versus actual vendor receipts, photographs of suspicious documents from our kitchen table, and a detailed timeline showing the escalating pattern of theft. My finger hovered over the send button. Once this email reached Henderson and Associates, Lily's career would crumble within hours. Her professional reputation would be destroyed. Criminal charges might follow. But then I remembered her voice through the thin walls. Maybe we should give him a deadline. 1 week to find work, or he's out. Her laughter as she discussed stealing my pension and warehousing me with strangers. I clicked send. The message vanished into cyberspace, carrying 28 attachments of irrefutable evidence. By evening, possibly within the next few hours, Lily would face the consequences of both her theft and her cruelty. I closed the laptop and carefully fed the physical documents into my paper shredder, watching months of preparation transform into thin ribbons. The evidence had served its purpose. Now it needed to disappear completely. Phase 3 was complete. Christopher had been embarrassed at work this morning. Lily would face career destruction this afternoon. Tonight, they'd both return home to a father they assumed was helpless, never suspecting he'd orchestrated their simultaneous downfall. I made myself tea and settled into my chair to wait for the evening's revelations. The front door slammed at 6:43 p.m., followed by the sound of heels clicking rapidly across the hardwood floor. I looked up from my evening newspaper, feigning surprise at the urgency in Lily's footsteps. She appeared in the living room doorway, her face blotchy with tears, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, blouse wrinkled, hair escaping its neat bun, hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "Lily, what happened?" I set down the paper, rising halfway from my chair with practiced concern. "Why are you crying?" "I'm facing termination." The words tumbled out between gasping sobs. "Someone sent my boss some documents. Financial records. They think I've been stealing." "What terrible luck." I moved toward her, my voice carefully calibrated to convey shock and sympathy. "Who could have done such a thing?" She collapsed into the armchair across from me, her composure completely shattered. "I don't know. Someone anonymous sent detailed evidence to Mr. Henderson this afternoon. Bank records, expense reports, everything laid out like some kind of forensic investigation." I settled back into my seat, maintaining my expression of bewildered concern, while internally cataloging every detail she revealed. "That sounds absolutely devastating. What exactly are they claiming?" "They're saying I inflated expense reports, created fake invoices, used the company credit card for personal purchases." Her voice broke completely. "Doug, they have everything. Dates, amounts, even photographs of documents." Fascinating. Henderson had moved quickly, confronting her within hours of receiving my email. A competent businessman, clearly the kind who understood that embezzlement required immediate action. "But surely this is some kind of misunderstanding," I said gently. "You're an honest person, Lily. Anyone who knows you would vouch for your character." "That's just it." She leaned forward desperately. "The evidence is so detailed, so specific. Whoever did this has been watching me for months, documenting everything. It's like they knew exactly what they were looking for." "Indeed they did. Have you told Christopher yet?" I asked, allowing appropriate worry to creep into my voice. Her face crumpled further. "No, how can I? He's already stressed about work, about the situation with you, missing your first day." She looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Doug, what am I going to do? If they fire me, if there are criminal charges, we'll lose everything." Now, I said soothingly, moving to pat her shoulder in a grandfatherly gesture. We'll figure this out together. Family supports family, right? The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd laughed about sending me to a nursing home was now seeking comfort from the very person she'd planned to abandon. They've suspended me pending a full investigation, she continued, wiping her nose with a tissue. Mr. Henderson said the evidence was too compelling to ignore. They're bringing in external auditors, reviewing every transaction I've handled in the past year. External auditors. Michael Richardson had certainly covered his tracks well when he'd helped me gather the initial evidence. The authentic expense reports he'd provided would perfectly corroborate my anonymous allegations. Is there any chance this could be resolved quietly? I asked, maintaining my helpful tone. Perhaps if you spoke with Mr. Henderson directly, explained your side of things. My side? She laughed bitterly. What side? The documents don't lie, Doug. Someone has built an airtight case against me, and I have no idea who or why. The sound of Christopher's car pulling into the driveway cut through her despair. We both heard his footsteps on the front porch, his key turning in the lock. Please, Lily whispered urgently. Let me tell him myself. He's going to be devastated. I nodded sympathetically, settling back to enjoy the evening's final act, as Christopher's voice called out from the entryway. Lily? Dad? I'm home. Christopher's heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, each thud carrying the weight of his difficult day. When he appeared in the living room doorway, his tie loosened and shirt wrinkled, his expression immediately shifted from tired annoyance to sharp alarm at the scene before him. What did you do to her, old man? He dropped his briefcase and rushed toward Lily, who was still dabbing at her tear-streaked face. I come home to find my wife crying, and you're sitting there like nothing happened. Christopher, I didn't do anything, I began, maintaining my calm tone despite his accusatory glare. Don't lie to me. His voice rose to a dangerous pitch. First you embarrassed me at work by not showing up. Now you've upset Lily somehow. What is wrong with you? Lily raised her hand weakly, trying to interrupt. Chris, please. It's not your father. Then what is it? He whirled on her, his manager persona fully engaged, demanding answers with the same authority he probably used on his subordinates. Why are you crying? What happened? They want to fire me. The words burst from her lips like a dam breaking. Someone sent anonymous evidence to Mr. Henderson claiming, I've been embezzling money. They've suspended me pending investigation. The color drained from Christopher's face as if someone had pulled a plug. He stood frozen, processing this information while his carefully constructed world continued to crumble around him. Embezzling? He sank into the nearest chair, his earlier anger replaced by stunned disbelief. That's impossible. You're the most honest person I know. That's what I tried to tell them, Lily continued, her voice gaining strength from his support. But whoever sent this information knew exactly what to look for. They had copies of expense reports, bank records, everything perfectly documented. I watched Christopher's face cycle through emotions, confusion, denial, growing panic as the implications hit him. His father missing work, now his wife facing criminal charges. Everything was spinning beyond his control. This can't be happening, he muttered, running his hands through his hair. Not now. Not when everything else is falling apart. What do you mean, everything else? Lily asked, momentarily distracted from her own crisis. Christopher looked up at me with undisguised resentment. My father here decided to play games yesterday. Didn't show up for work after I personally vouched for him with my boss. Made me look like a complete amateur. I explained that was just confusion about the time. I started. No more excuses. Christopher shot to his feet, pointing an accusing finger at me. Tomorrow you're coming to work with me, and you're working without any tricks, without any senior moments, without any nonsense. I'm driving you there personally to make sure you show up. Christopher, that's not necessary. And let's have no tricks, because I know you. His voice cracked with desperation and fury. I've had it with both of you causing problems. My reputation, my marriage, my entire life is under attack, and I'm not letting it happen. Lily looked between us with growing confusion, trying to process this family conflict while dealing with her own catastrophe. Don't worry, son, I said quietly, meeting his blazing stare with surprising calm. Today everything will be different. Something in my tone gave him pause, For just a moment, his aggressive posture wavered as he tried to interpret my words. "It better be," he said finally, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Because if it's not, if you embarrass me one more time, I'm following through on every promise I made about nursing homes and taking your pension. Do you understand me?" I nodded solemnly, hiding the small smile that threatened to emerge. Tomorrow would indeed be different, more different than Christopher could possibly imagine. The house fell into tense silence, 3 family members facing separate crises, none of them realizing that all their troubles stemmed from the same source. Morning came too soon for Christopher, but I'd slept peacefully, knowing this would be the final act of my carefully orchestrated play. I dressed methodically in the work clothes he'd bought me, each piece a costume for the performance of a lifetime. Christopher was already in the kitchen when I appeared, gulping coffee with grim determination. His face bore the marks of a sleepless night, dark circles under his eyes, stubble he'd forgotten to shave, the tight expression of a man who decided to solve his problems through sheer force of will. "Ready?" he asked curtly, not bothering with pleasantries. "Ready," I replied, pulling on the jacket that completed my janitor's uniform. The drive to Whitmore Industries passed in tense silence for the first 10 minutes. Portland's morning traffic gave Christopher something to focus his nervous energy on, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, counting down the minutes until everything changed. "Let me make something crystal clear," Christopher finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Today there will be no confusion about time, no mysterious illnesses, no convenient memory lapses. You will show up, you will work, and you will make me look competent in front of my boss." "I understand completely," I said, keeping my tone appropriately submissive. "Do you?" He shot me a sideways glance. "Because yesterday's stunt nearly cost me my job. Leonard asked pointed questions about my judgment, about why I was vouching for unreliable people. I had to convince him to give you another chance." Poor Leonard, he must have been thoroughly confused by the whole situation, trying to understand why his business partner's son was so invested in hiring his business partner as menial labor. "And let's have no tricks, because I know you," Christopher continued, warming to his theme. "I know you probably think this is all some game, that you can manipulate situations to get your way. But those days are over. From now on, I'm in charge. Don't worry, son," I said, allowing just a hint of mysterious confidence to color my words. "Today, everything will be different." He glanced at me sharply, perhaps catching something in my tone that didn't match his expectations. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that I understand the situation better now," I replied carefully. Sometimes it takes time to see things clearly. The Whitmore Industries building came into view, a sleek modern structure of glass and steel that represented 25 years of growth from Leonard's garage-based startup. Christopher had driven past this building thousands of times, never knowing his father had helped make it possible. "There it is," Christopher said, his voice mixing pride with anxiety. 3,000 employees, multi-million-dollar operation. "This is where real men work, Dad. This is what success looks like." Indeed it was, and today Christopher would learn exactly how much success his family had really achieved. We pulled into the parking lot, Christopher choosing a spot near the main entrance. As he turned off the engine, I could see his hands trembling slightly. Whether from anger, anxiety, or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. "Remember," he said, turning to face me with desperate intensity, "whatever happens in there, you follow my lead. I do the talking. You stay quiet, respectful, and grateful for the opportunity." "Of course," I agreed, suppressing the irony of receiving such instructions about entering my own company. Christopher climbed out of the car and waited for me to join him on the sidewalk. Together, we walked toward the glass doors that would open onto the final scene of our family drama. In less than 5 minutes, Christopher Cook would discover exactly who his father really was. The glass doors of Whitmore Industries opened with a soft whoosh, revealing the gleaming marble lobby I hadn't seen in months. Christopher strode ahead confidently, nodding to the security guard who waved us through without question. Another irony, since I'd helped design these very security protocols years ago. Stay close and keep quiet, Christopher muttered as we entered the main corridor. I'll handle all the talking. The hallway bustled with morning activity. Employees clutching coffee cups, heading to meetings, discussing projects. I recognized several faces, though they didn't seem to notice the elderly man in janitor's uniform walking behind an anxious middle manager. Christopher had acquired a mop and bucket from the supply closet, which he thrust into my hands with barely concealed satisfaction. Here, make it look authentic when Leonard sees you. I accepted the cleaning supplies without comment, internally amused at the theatrical nature of this final performance. Around us, the business of my company continued as usual. Reports being analyzed, decisions being made, profits being earned from investments I'd helped fund decades ago. There he is, Christopher breathed, straightening his tie and adopting his most professional demeanor. Leonard Whitmore was walking toward us from the opposite end of the corridor, making his customary morning rounds through the facility. At 64, he carried himself with the confidence of a successful CEO, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his expression focused on the tablet in his hand. Mr. Whitmore, Christopher called out, his voice carrying just the right note of respectful enthusiasm. Perfect timing, sir. Leonard looked up, initially distracted, then focusing on Christopher with polite attention. His gaze moved briefly to me, a routine glance at the elderly janitor accompanying his employee. Then he stopped walking entirely. Christopher, Leonard said slowly, his voice carrying a note of confusion, you brought him here? Yes, sir. Christopher's chest puffed with pride. I solved our staffing problem and my family situation at the same time. Here's my father, the janitor. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Around us, other employees continued their conversations, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their corporate corridor. Leonard's face transformed through a spectrum of emotions: recognition, disbelief, and finally a cold fury that made the temperature in the hallway seem to drop 10 degrees. Christopher, Leonard said, his voice deadly quiet, do you have any idea what you've just done? Sir? Christopher's confidence began to waver as he registered Leonard's expression. You brought Douglas Cook, one of the largest shareholders in this company, into my building with a mop in his hands, and you're standing there proud of yourself? The color drained from Christopher's face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible, he whispered. 25 years ago, your father invested $500,000 in my startup, Leonard continued, his voice rising. Without him, there would be no Whitmore Industries. Without him, there would be no job for you to lose, which you just did. I don't understand. Then you're fired, immediately. Leonard's words cut through the corridor like a blade, causing nearby employees to stop and stare. Clear out your office and leave the premises. Security will escort you out. Christopher stood frozen, his world collapsing around him with the speed and finality of a controlled demolition. His briefcase slipped from nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent hallway. Leonard turned to me with genuine concern, the anger leaving his voice entirely. Douglas, my friend, what on earth is going on here? I set down the mop and straightened to my full height, dropping the submissive posture I'd maintained for so long. When I spoke, my voice carried the authority and intelligence I'd kept hidden for days. Leonard, I think we need to have a private conversation in your office. Leonard's executive office had always been a sanctuary of success. Rich mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Portland skyline, walls lined with awards and photographs documenting 25 years of business triumph. As we entered, I noticed several pictures showing Leonard and me together at various company milestones, evidence of a partnership Christopher had never known existed. Christopher followed us in like a sleepwalker, his face still ghostly pale from the corridor revelation. He slumped into a leather chair uninvited, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Douglas, please sit, Leonard said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat countless times discussing business strategy and company direction. Can someone explain to me why my business partner was just introduced to me as a janitor by his own son? I settled into the familiar seat, feeling the weight of deception finally lifting from my shoulders. Leonard, My family has been under the impression that I'm financially dependent on them. They've been uncharitable in their assessment of my worth. Uncharitable? Leonard's voice sharpened. Christopher, your father owns 37% of this company. He's been quietly drawing dividends for decades, not because he needs the money, but because that's how investments work. What exactly did you think he did for a living? Christopher's voice came out as barely a whisper. Factory work, manual labor. I thought he was poor. Poor? Leonard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your father could buy and sell most of Portland's business district. He chose to live modestly, chose to let you believe he was struggling, and apparently chose to let you treat him like a burden. The truth hung in the air between us. 25 years of hidden success, finally exposed to the light. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city skyline, a view I'd helped Leonard afford through my early investment and continued partnership. But why? Christopher asked, looking directly at me for the first time since the corridor confrontation. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become without the influence of money, I replied calmly. I wanted to know if you'd respect your father for who he was, not what he owned. The answer, unfortunately, is that you wouldn't. Leonard leaned back in his executive chair, studying Christopher with undisguised distaste. Let me understand this correctly. You discovered your father had retired, and your response was to force him into menial labor? We couldn't afford, Christopher began. You couldn't afford. Leonard's voice rose. Your father has been supporting you your entire adult life. College tuition, wedding expenses, house down payment, money that came from his share of this company's profits. And you repaid that generosity by threatening to put him in a nursing home? Christopher's face crumpled as the full magnitude of his mistakes became clear. I didn't know. Nobody told me. Nobody told you to be decent to your father either, I said quietly. Nobody told you to treat the man who raised you with basic human respect. That should have come naturally. Leonard stood up, moving to the window overlooking the parking lot. Douglas, what do you want me to do about this situation? Nothing that hasn't already been done, I replied. Justice has been served. Christopher's employment here is terminated, as you've already announced. His wife faces criminal charges for embezzlement at her company, though that's a separate matter entirely. Christopher's head snapped up. You knew about Lily? I know about everything, son. I always have. I stood as well, feeling taller than I had in years. The question now is what you're going to do with this knowledge. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of business continuing in the building below. Christopher sat surrounded by the evidence of success he'd never recognized, finally understanding that his father wasn't the weak, dependent man he'd imagined. Leonard walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. Douglas, you're always welcome here. This is your company as much as mine. Thank you, Leonard, but I think it's time I actually retired. Properly this time, on my own terms. I looked at Christopher one final time. Perhaps this experience will teach you something about respect, humility, and the difference between being poor and choosing to live simply. Christopher opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. There were no words that could undo what had been done, no apologies that could restore what had been broken. As we prepared to leave the office, Leonard held the door open for me. Justice has been restored, he said simply. Indeed it had. After days of humiliation and threats, I was finally standing where I belonged. Not as a burden or a charity case, but as Douglas Cook, successful businessman, respected partner, and a man who had learned the true value of dignity. The week of my retirement had ended exactly as it should have, with truth revealed, respect restored, and justice served. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.